There is a moment, often so brief you almost miss it, when your heart feels the first flicker of hunger. It comes softly, like the hush before a storm, disguised as simple curiosity. A light fondness for the way they smile, the way their voice settles into your nervous system. You think it's harmless, just an ordinary interest, but underneath, something ancient and ravenous begins to wake. You notice how you lean forward without realizing it, searching for traces of yourself in the way they look at you. Every small response becomes evidence. Maybe you're special, maybe you're chosen, maybe this is the connection that will finally dissolve the ache that has lived in you longer than you can remember. You catch yourself replaying the first conversations, trying to decode the hidden meanings in their laughter, their silences, the careful phrasing of every text. The sweetness of wanting begins to ferment into the ache of need, and that need doesn't feel shameful, yet it feels alive, electric, almost holy. You tell yourself everyone longs for closeness, that this is just what happens when you meet someone whose energy hooks into yours like a subtle barbed wire. But you don't see yet how easily desire can slip its leash, how quickly it can become a tyrant that demands you sacrifice your peace on the altar of their attention. Even now, in the soft beginnings, you feel it, how your imagination starts to braid itself around the tiniest gestures. They respond slowly, and your stomach tightens with a bright, involuntary panic. They say something kind, and your chest blooms with relief so fierce it nearly makes you dizzy. You are building a mythology, already a story, where they are the hero who rescues you from the quiet terror of being unseen. In this story, you are finally enough. You are finally chosen. But deep down, something knows this hunger is not as innocent as it pretends to be. It is the seed of an obsession that, if left unexamined, will grow roots through every part of you. And so you stand here, at the threshold of a longing that feels both tender and dangerous. You have not yet named it for what it is. You are just beginning to understand that the heart can crave what the soul knows will never satisfy. You think you are falling in love with them, but what you are really falling into is a reflection and echo of the hidden corners of yourself you spent years denying. You don't notice it at first. The thrill of their attention, the magnetic pull of their presence, all of it feels so real, so alive, so singular. But look closer, and you will see the outlines of your own shadow clinging to their silhouette, the traits you secretly wish you possessed. The qualities you repress or disown, somehow they all shimmer in this person, as if to say, here is your missing wholeness. They are confident where you feel small. They are unattainable where you feel needy. They embody the power, beauty, and certainty you cannot yet claim, and so your mind, desperate for relief from the burden of your own incompleteness, projects these qualities outward, imagining they belong to someone else. It is easier this way, to worship the illusion of perfection in another than to confront the disarray inside you. You catch yourself crafting elaborate fantasies about who they are, what they mean, what salvation their love could offer. You do not realize that your obsession is a mirror, and you are falling in love with the possibility of yourself. When they look at you, you feel validated, momentarily whole, as if the parts you abandoned are returning home. But this homecoming is fragile. It depends on their continued presence, their affection, their willingness to keep carrying the pieces you refuse to hold. Every interaction becomes a negotiation with your own emptiness. Every moment of attention feels like proof that you are worthy. Every withdrawal feels like confirmation that you are not. This is the architecture of projection, a cathedral of longing built on the unstable foundation of self-rejection. You stand inside it, lighting candles to an idol you've mistaken for love. You don't see yet that the God you worship is an effigy stitched together from your own unmet needs. And as long as you believe they hold the key to your salvation, You remain a prisoner to your own illusions. If you look carefully, you will see the outline of your shadow in every word you can't say, every boundary you won't set, every desperate hope that they will complete you. You think you want them, but you are really aching to reclaim yourself. You feel it strongest in the quiet moments, the conviction that they are the answer to everything you have ever questioned about your worth. It's a narcotic fantasy. This idea that someone else could hold the missing half of your soul. You tell yourself that if you could just secure their love, their constant presence, the trembling anxiety in your chest would finally dissolve. That the confusion, the loneliness, the gnawing suspicion that you're unlovable would be silenced by their devotion. But the deeper you go, the more you sense how fragile this illusion really is. Every glance, every reply, every subtle shift in their tone becomes a referendum on your value. When they are close, you feel electric, certain, almost invincible. But when they pull away, even for a moment, your stomach knots with dread. And your mind begins to spin elaborate stories about what you did wrong. You replay old conversations in forensic detail, combing through every word, searching for the hidden flaw that must have driven them back into themselves. And still, you believe that if you can just say the perfect thing, offer the perfect version of yourself, they will finally choose you fully. This is the fantasy that drives obsession, the belief that love is a puzzle you can solve if you just sacrifice enough of yourself. You begin to chip away at your edges, sanding yourself down into something more palatable, more accommodating, more worthy of being kept. But in the process, you abandon the very parts of you that could have ever sustained real connection. The more you contort yourself to keep them close, the more your own reflection recedes from your awareness. You stop recognizing the person staring back at you in the mirror. But the hunger only grows stronger. Sometimes you catch a glimpse of the absurdity, the way your happiness rises and falls on the tide of someone else's whims. The way your imagination creates 1,000 tiny hooks that tether your identity to their approval. You sense that this longing is not about them at all, that it is an echo of an older wound. A childhood hunger you could never satisfy, and yet you keep reaching, keep hoping, keep believing that if you could just get closer, this person would complete you. But no one else can fill the hollows you refuse to touch, and as long as you keep believing they're the missing piece, you remain divided against yourself and exile in your own life. You can almost pinpoint the exact second it begins the way. Your stomach flips when they take too long to respond. The sudden chill that settles into your chest when their affection turns to indifference. You tell yourself you're imagining it, that you're being too sensitive, but your body knows the truth long before your mind will admit it. You feel the old terror blooming inside you. The conviction that their withdrawal means you are disposable, forgettable, unworthy of love. Rejection becomes a twisted kind of fuel, feeding the engine of your obsession with its steady supply of humiliation and hope. Each silence feels like a wound you can't stop touching. Each vague excuse becomes an accusation you internalize as proof of your unworthiness. Your ego, bruised and desperate, tries to bargain with reality. If I can just be more understanding, more patient, more perfect, maybe they'll stay. But no matter how you twist yourself into compliance, you are met with the same hollow ache when they drift away again. You begin to crave their attention with a manic urgency, as if each reply were oxygen and you are already suffocating. You wait for every notification, every sign that you have not yet been erased from their world. When they reappear, offering scraps of affection, your relief is so overwhelming you almost forget how small you've become to survive this. You call this devotion, but it is nothing more than your ego dancing frantically to avoid the abyss of rejection. You notice how you start measuring your value by the inches of their interest, how much time they give you, how many words they offer, how quickly they respond. Your self-worth becomes a hostage to their inconsistency. You feel yourself shrinking, but you can't look away. It's as if some primitive part of you believes that enduring this pain proves your love is real. That the more you suffer, the more you will be rewarded with their permanence. In your clearer moments, you sense how absurd it is to hand over so much power to someone else's ambivalence. But obsession has no patience for dignity. It wants you pliant, hungry, easy to manipulate. So you keep showing up, keep performing your worthiness, keep trying to earn what was never yours to begin with. And all the while, you tell yourself it's love. But deep down, you know this is only the fear of rejection wearing the mask of devotion. You tell yourself you just want them to be happy. That your only wish is for their peace, their fulfillment, their ease in this life. But if you are honest, you will see how quickly your generosity curdles into strategy, how your tenderness becomes a subtle form of control. You offer your understanding not because you are selfless, but because you are terrified. That if you set boundaries, if you name your needs, if you reveal the messy truth of your own longing, they will vanish. So you swallow your resentment, coat it in sweetness, and call it love. You notice how you start to monitor their moods with the precision of a scientist studying a volatile element. Every sigh, every pause, every shift in tone is catalogued and analyzed. You adjust yourself in response, trimming back your expectations, rehearsing your reactions, smoothing over your own disappointments. You believe that if you can stay agreeable, if you can become exactly what they want, you will be safe from the catastrophe of abandonment. But this safety is an illusion. Underneath your careful accommodation is a demand. Stay with me. Need me. Choose me. You cannot bear the thought of their freedom, because their freedom means you are powerless. And so you begin to engineer little traps of dependency, offering help, offering devotion, offering 1,000 small sacrifices that you secretly hope will bind them to you. You call it devotion, but it is really fear in a beautiful disguise. When they pull away, you feel the animal panic rising in your throat, the certainty that you are about to be discarded. You rush to prove your usefulness, to remind them how much they rely on your presence. You can't see that this is not love, but the desperate choreography of someone who believes they are unlovable without performance. You can see how your attempts to control the story only drive you deeper into self-betrayal. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between your efforts, you sense it, a sharp awareness that none of this is about them, that this elaborate dances only the echo of old survival strategies, the ones you learned when you were too young to understand that love cannot be bartered or coerced. But even knowing this, you keep performing. Because to stop would mean facing the truth you spent your whole life trying to outrun, that real love can't be controlled. And you are terrified of what would remain if you stopped trying to manage everything. You think you are simply in love with a person, but you are actually in love with an archetype, the animus. That hidden masculine force inside you that now projects itself onto this flesh and blood figure. You can feel it in the way your longing eclipses rational thought, how your desire for their validation begins to consume the oxygen in your own psyche. You don't just want their affection. You crave their recognition of your secret worth, their blessing on the parts of you that still feel unformed. He becomes a symbol, every compliment a benediction, every rejection a condemnation. You start to believe that if you can earn his admiration, you will finally prove yourself to the Father within, the nameless authority that once withheld approval. You notice how you defer to his opinions, how you absorb his beliefs as if they were your own. Each time he praises you, you feel a temporary solidity, as though he is granting you permission to exist. Each time he withdraws, you dissolve. This is the animus, an integrated and wild and unconscious force that slips its leash and claims dominion over your choices. You think it is romantic passion. But it is really a possession. You find yourself sacrificing your boundaries to keep him close, offering your authenticity like a tithe to this inner god. You lose track of what you want, what you believe, who you are without the mirror of his attention. When you look back later, you will see how you allowed this projection to swallow your clarity. You will remember the nights you lay awake rehearsing, conversations, the days you abandoned your priorities to orbit his preferences, all of it in service to the hidden belief that he alone could confer your value. And still you called it love, because it felt too enormous to be anything else. But obsession is never about the other person. It is a hunger to reclaim the exiled parts of yourself you once gave away for safety. You are not really chasing him. You are chasing the sensation of completion, the illusion that someone else can finish the work you refuse to begin. This is the animus in shadow tyrannical, demanding, seductive. He will keep you tethered to longing until you finally turn inward and learn to integrate his power as your own. Until you see that no external figure can crown you with the worth you keep denying yourself. It doesn't happen all at once. You don't wake up one morning and realize your life has been colonized by an obsession. It creeps in gradually, like a slow flood rising at the edges of your awareness. You begin to notice how your thoughts always return to them like a compass, needle fixed to their direction, even when you're busy, even when you pretend you don't care. A part of you remains vigilant, scanning for any sign they might reappear or disappear entirely. You tell yourself this vigilance is love. But beneath the surface, something older and more relentless has taken over. You feel it in your body, a low-grade urgency that never really leaves. The constant tension in your shoulders, the ache in your gut when they don't reply. It is as if some ancient part of your nervous system has decided your survival depends on their presence. And in a way, it does, because the story you've built around them is the scaffolding holding up your fragile sense of self. This is the moment when obsession becomes possession, when your autonomy is quietly hijacked by the unconscious drives you need. I'll learn to name. You notice how you start making decisions you don't fully understand, sending messages you swore you wouldn't, canceling plans to be available just in case, crafting excuses to see them one more time. You watch yourself do it, as spectator to your own compulsions. You feel the shame afterward, but it does nothing to loosen the grip. You can't help but marvel at the power of the unconscious, the way it operates with a cunning precision. Always seeking the familiar pain, always reenacting the same old drama. You think you are making choices, but you are simply fulfilling the script that was written long before you knew what love was supposed to be. Sometimes you catch a glimmer of clarity and intuition that this hunger is not about them at all. That it is an echo of old wounds, the parent who was never satisfied, the caretaker who was never consistent, the tiny self who learned that love was something you earned through sacrifice. But the moment pauses and the tide pulls you under again. You tell yourself that if you can just get them to love you back, everything will make sense. But obsession doesn't want understanding. It wants repetition. It wants you small, compliant, predictable, and until you decide to interrupt the pattern, it will keep you locked in its hypnotic embrace, forever searching for wholeness in someone else's eyes. There is an ugliness to obsession that no one warns you about, a slow corrosion that eats away at you. Our capacity for genuine happiness. You don't notice it at first. You think your attachment is pure, that your devotion is noble, but eventually, you feel the sour taste of envy rising in your throat every time they choose something that doesn't include you. You catch yourself resenting the parts of their life you can't control, their friends, their ambitions, their moments of solitude. Each choice they make without you feels like a tiny betrayal. Proof that your place in their world is always conditional. You tell yourself it's just disappointment, but underneath, Something darker is blooming. You feel it when you scroll through photos of them smiling with people you've never met. You feel it when they cancel plans, when they forget to check in, when they seem unbothered by the distance that keeps you awake at night. Your envy grows fangs, transforming your longing into something possessive and sharp. You start to imagine their freedom as an indictment of your insufficiency, if they can be happy without you. What does that say about your worth? You feel your spirit contract every time you witness their ease, their laughter, their simple contentment that has nothing to do with you. You can't admit this aloud, but a part of you hopes they feel incomplete in your absence, that they are as tormented by the distance as you are. It is here that joy begins to die. Because you cannot celebrate what you secretly resent. You cannot love someone whose wholeness feels like a threat to your survival. So you disguise your envy in the language of concern, in small criticisms wrapped in tenderness. You tell yourself you are only protecting the connection, when in truth you are trying to tether them to your insecurity. You notice how this envy isolates you, how it poisons your perception until every interaction becomes a contest you are destined to lose. You resent them for the very qualities that first drew you in: their independence, their aliveness, their refusal to collapse into your hunger. And still you call this love, even as you watch it hollow you out from the inside. Somewhere, deep down, you know this is not about them at all. It is about the pieces of yourself you abandoned so long ago that you no longer recognize them. And as long as you refuse to reclaim those parts, you will keep confusing envy for devotion and possession for intimacy. Eventually, there comes a moment when the story collapses under its own weight. You feel it first as a weariness in your bones, a bone-deep exhaustion from carrying the fantasy that this hunger could ever be satisfied by another person. You replay the same tired arguments in your head, the same rehearsed explanations for why you keep tolerating what feels like slow starvation. You've invested so much hope into this illusion that walking away feels like amputating a part of yourself. But there is a clarity that only arrives when you're finally too tired to keep pretending. You notice how much you've shrunk to make this work. How many times you've betrayed your instincts just to avoid the loneliness waiting on the other side of disconnection. You remember all the nights you lay awake, mapping escape routes you never took, telling yourself you'd leave tomorrow, next week, next time they hurt you. Yet you stayed because the pain was familiar, and familiarity felt safer than freedom. When you look honestly, you see that this was never about love. It was about the dream of completion, the fantasy that someone else could rescue you from the hollow spaces inside your own chest. You wanted them to be the cure for wounds you never wanted to face alone, and every time they failed to be your salvation, you told yourself it was because you weren't enough, never considering that maybe it was because no human being can carry the weight of your self-abandonment. This is the breaking point. The moment when the mythology you built around them shatters in your hands. You feel grief. Yes, grief for the dream. Grief for the version of yourself who believed love required such sacrifice. But beneath the grief is a tiny ember of something else, something like relief. Because the fantasy was killing you slowly. Because the illusion was never going to become reality. You see it now in merciless detail. How you confused obsession for devotion, control for a connection, projection for intimacy. How you made them your mirror instead of becoming whole on your own. And though it feels like failure, it is something closer to liberation, because finally, you can stop begging to be completed by a story that was never true. You can stand in the ruins and know that you survived the collapse, and maybe, just maybe, that survival is the beginning of something real. There is a moment quiet, almost anticlimactic, when you realize you no longer want to be consumed. The hunger is still there, a phantom ache that lingers at the edges of your awareness, but something in you has shifted. You are no longer willing to surrender your sovereignty for the illusion of closeness. You see with new eyes that obsession was never proof of love, it was evidence of your fear. Your refusal to trust that you could be whole without them. You feel the rawness of this awareness like fresh skin exposed to the sun. There is no more room for pretending. No more excuses about why you kept chasing someone who could never complete you. You watch the compulsion to reach out rise in you. One last text, one last plea, one last offering of your dignity, and you let it pass without acting. You are learning that freedom sometimes feels like withdrawal, that healing can look like emptiness before it becomes peace. In this space, you start to remember yourself, the self that existed before you tangled your worth around their attention. You remember the quiet pleasures you abandoned, the truths you silenced, the boundaries you erased. You feel your own contours returning, distinct and unblurred by their influence. This is what it means to choose wholeness, to allow yourself to be incomplete and still worthy, imperfect and still deserving of love that does not require your self-erasure. You see now that real intimacy cannot be born from possession. It cannot grow in the soil of your need to control, to tether, to extract reassurance from someone else's devotion. Real intimacy is spacious, alive, free. It demands that you bring your entire self to the table, shadow, longing, flaws, and trust that you are enough as you are. So you begin, imperfectly, to practice letting go. You stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen. You stop measuring your value by how much space you occupy in their mind. You return your focus to the only relationship that ever truly mattered, the one you have with yourself. And in this returning, you feel something unexpected, the first taste of peace. You know the old hunger will visit again, but this time you will recognize it for what it is, a longing to reclaim the parts of yourself you once believed were unworthy of love. And you will meet that longing not with desperation, but with a fierce, steady kindness. There is something exquisite about the moment you finally decide to stop searching for your salvation in someone else's arms. You feel the phantom pain of the old hunger still pulsing in your chest, but you no longer mistake it for evidence that you are broken. You see clearly now that your obsession was never truly about them. It was about your unwillingness to sit with the quiet truth of your own incompleteness, to face the places inside you that still feel unworthy, still crave approval, still ache for a rescue. And yet, here you are standing in the center of your own life again. Maybe for the first time, you no longer need to barter your authenticity for fleeting affection. You no longer need to perform worthiness to avoid the terror of rejection. You have tasted what it feels like to abandon yourself in pursuit of a fantasy. And you have chosen instead to come home to the reality of who you are, imperfect, unfinished, but finally whole enough to belong to yourself. This is individuation, the slow and glamorous work of reclaiming every part you exiled in the name of love. The decision to stop chasing the projection and start becoming the person you once hoped someone else would make you. If this reflection stirred something in you, if you saw yourself in these words, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Like this video to help it reach others who are ready to step out of the trance of obsession. Subscribe if you'd like to explore more about emotional boundaries, projection, and the journey toward wholeness. Your healing is yours, alone to claim, but you don't have to walk the path unaccompanied.